completion of the trilogy. The first one was on the 25 most important events. The second one was the 25 most important people. And this completes the trilogy, the 25 most important books. So what do I mean by books, and what was in and out, and what was the criteria? So we'll spend a moment talking about that. So this focuses on books written or translated after the death of the last apostle, which would have been John, sometime in the 90s, probably the mid-90s. So the Gospel of Mark would not be included in this because it was written before the death of the last apostle. Now, a modern translation of the Gospel of Mark could be included, but not the original book. At first, I was thinking about having it go all the way back to the New Testament, but then I thought, well, so then the list almost becomes meaningless, because it's like the whole list would have to be New Testament books, and then and then I would be in a position of, now this New Testament book is more important than this one, but I didn't want to touch any of that, so that's why I made it post-apostolic. So that's the first thing. Second thing, and this is key, the work needs to have been an actual book. So not a sermon. So Sinners in the Hands of an Angry God is not in here because it's not a book, it was a sermon. Not a decree. There were decrees by popes, bulls, that set in motion the crusades, set in motion the Inquisition. Obviously very important, but they weren't books, they were simply decrees. Letters. There have been very important letters in the history of Christianity. They're not included. Blogs are not included because, again, they're not books. So it has to have been an actual book. So that was an important criteria. So the criteria that I applied for whether it made the list or not, it had to have been very influential, at least in its own time. And so those you might find in the higher numbers, 25 through 15, that sort of thing. To get in the top 15 or the top 10 particularly, it not only had to be influential in its time, it has to be influential from that time forward. And obviously there are examples of that. The Gutenberg Bible would be an example. The reverberations of that we're still feeling today. The King James translation of the Bible, the reverberations we're still feeling 400 years later. This is not just theological tones, so it's not all City of God and Summa Theologica and Calvin's Institutes. Those are important because they had an impact on the view of theology of the church, but I also included works that had broad popular appeal and maybe got people thinking about some issues that they might not have thought about before. Some examples of those, the Chronicles of Narnia is included, not because I put it on the same level of City of God or Christian Institutes as a theological tract, but it sold millions and millions of copies and introduced some what we would call Christology or Christological themes to people that they wouldn't have seen before. Left Behind was the same thing. It was such an international success. And even though I am not a pre-tribulationalist, and we spent 3 months talking about what that was, so I won't go back and do it now. But even though I'm not a pre-tribulationalist, people who were only vaguely familiar with the book of Revelation, by the time they got done reading all those books and attending the movies and all that stuff, they darn well knew what the book of Revelation was all about from a futurist standpoint. They were familiar with the pre-tribulation viewpoint. So popular books are included in this also, so I didn't want to give you the impression this was all going to be dusty, thick tomes that have no paragraphs in them. How many of you have ever read, at any point in your life, Christian Institutes by John Calvin? It's one paragraph, I swear. You start reading it 1,600 pages later, the paragraph ends. I mean, Calvin didn't use paragraph. It's very difficult to read because of the lack of paragraph. Well, some of the books in here actually have paragraph. So that was important criteria for inclusion also. And I realized there are books that I could have included that I did. Again, this is my list. You might have a different list, or you might have changed the order of the list. But just off the top of my head, both Bernardo Guy and Torquemada wrote handbooks for inquisitions. Well, you could make a case, though, one of those should be included because it was a negative impact, but it had a huge impact on Christianity. So, I mean, there's a lot of different books that could have been included. There's probably some I didn't even think about. I thought of different errors in people who were influential. I ended up with 2 books by C.S. Lewis, because I think he did have a huge impact, kind of World War II, at least up into the 60s and 70s, and then recently they came out with 3 of the Narnia Chronicles in movie form, so kind of had a revival. I think I have 2 from Augustine. So I think C.S. Lewis and Augustine are the only ones that I have more than one for. So we'll see what you think of the list, but these are the criteria. So if you had bought the book last week, for example, before you asked, well, why isn't Sinners in the Hands